Alyssa, I'm so I'm so blessed to be sitting with you right now. I feel like you are angelic, truly. I feel like your energy is lovely and embodied and beautiful and grounded and nourishing. And I've wanted to have this time to connect more. We have a lot of friends in common who wanted us to connect. And so we've connected through the world of Instagram and had some conversations. But thank you for flying in from Nashville and being in my living room. So welcome.
Thank you for providing such a sacred, safe space, because I wouldn't imagine having this conversation with anybody else.
That means so much to me. I love getting to be in the world that you've created and looking at the beauty and just the way you experience reality is it's just gorgeous. I'm so curious, like, how you got to be the person who loves beauty and loves beautiful things. What was the journey that led you to curating this life?
It was really not as beautiful as how you make it sound. It really evolved from a place of fear and pain and instability. And growing up, my childhood was a little chaotic. So I spent probably the first 32 years of my life chasing arbitrary levels of success and coming from a place of fear and this lack-based mentality up until I was diagnosed with cancer. I left my city of Tulsa, Oklahoma when I was 18, went to college on a scholarship, and then joined the corporate world. I worked for 2 Fortune 100 companies. And high level, I went from corporate to cancer. And that was my reckoning.
How old were you? Because you're so young now, I can't imagine.
I was 32 when I was diagnosed. And I think and I had a very easy form of cancer, I had thyroid cancer. And I wasn't coping with it that well until we thought it had spread to my lungs. And that's when it hit me. And I really had to come to terms with my own mortality and what I wanted out of my life, and to also get really honest and clear in the form of who I wanted to do life with, who I wanted to release, what I needed to release. And a lot of that was fear. And a lot of that was the trauma of growing up and coming from divorced parents and that story that we hold on to. And there was substance abuse growing up and, just things that make you grow up a lot quicker than you really should. And so I look back at it now and I always say that cancer was a gift that gave me so much more than it took away, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if I hadn't picked up a camera as my healing catharsis through this time. And it was really a therapeutic modality for myself. It was in the corporate world, I was so structured and saying yes to everybody else's goals for myself instead of me consciously creating the life that I wanted.
I mean, every 3 sentences that you just said it's a book, it's a title of a book, it's packed with so much wisdom. And it's one thing to say those things now from a place of wisdom, but to have the grace and the strength to live that, you lived those moments.
It was hard, but it was beautiful. I mean, I really try not to regret those things or be a victim of those stories, and it gave me permission to say yes to myself. And like you are so rooted and grounded and believe in this too. But when you start saying yes to yourself, the world meets you at your yes. And I had never experienced that before. And so creativity was this conduit into healing, but also stepping into my power and my worth. And I had never made that switch before until I held this creative tool that gave me flight.
Yeah.
So
it's all so true. Creativity comes, when the nervous system is settled down, then we have the opportunity to move into like a flow state where we get a download, where we see something we didn't see before. And that's creativity. Just that.
I always say that creativity is a fancy word for listening. And you have to really still yourself, be calm in here. You have to be really still inside in order to move forward. And you have to be able to connect to the world around you in a really sacred way. And it's listening. It's listening to yourself. It's listening to your environment and being of service to that. That's what creativity is.
It's fascinating because everything you just said is so powerful. What a powerful paradigm shift for people who think, and they'll say sometimes, well, I'm not creative.
Everyone's creative.
Right?
And I didn't think I had a creative bone in my body until I was 32 years old. I mean, I really didn't. And my mother is very creative. My father is more of this entrepreneurial spirit. And I was just in this such a limited belief structure that I never thought to expand beyond that fear. And my wake-up call was cancer. People don't need to have cancer to wake up. No. They just really need to still themselves, be quiet in their own body, and not constantly be distracted by everything else external, creating noise and pulling us in a million different directions.
It's huge what you just said. I mean, it's really such an invitation that all of us can learn to listen. And I read, many years ago that Steve Jobs had been a Zen meditator for years, right? Practicing the art of stillness. And then it was from a calligraphy class that he saw beauty in the way of fonts. And he thought, what if I make a font that's beautiful? And then what if I made an entire technology where the entire goal was beauty? And so there is this portal within us all to listen. I'm really struck, though, that your corporate career wasn't a creative one because you're so creative. So what were you doing in corporate?
So at first, my first introduction into business, I was a marketing coordinator. I was answering phones. I was putting newspapers on leather top desks. Like I was doing media buys, a little bit of copy editing. And then I wanted to go bigger corporate, and I was in industrial sales and manufacturing for a blue chip stock company, 3M. They're incredible. They taught me, they invest a little under $250,000 into each new hire. And it's like joining the military because you have to agree to go anywhere in the country before you have an assignment.
What a cool experience.
It was extraordinary. And I felt like through that experience, I learned what value was and how even it was in sales, it wasn't about you. It was about how to provide additional resources to the human being sitting in front of you. And that's what I learned from that company. It was incredible.
I feel like every person needs that experience. That's amazing.
Especially that, but yes. And then the market crashed in 2008, 2009. And it was interesting. Growing up in such chaos, I was in industrial sales and manufacturing. I felt that instability in the country in manufacturing. And so I had the foresight to start looking for another job. And so I went into the medical device spine industry, and it was pretty technical, but incredible. And worked with neurosurgeons and orthopedic spine surgeons selling implants and troubleshooting cases, making sure that their surgical team was one step ahead of the surgeon for like 6 years. I didn't have a vacation for 6 years. I was very unhealthy in that position.
You're such a curious person. Like, it's so obvious that you are so resourceful and so willing and like a sponge, like wanting to learn.
This was my fear trauma response. I was like, I need financial security.
Right.
I'm going to compromise my entire life and freedom and my femininity. And I was really really focused on being hired for my knowledge and not the way I looked. So I really downplayed a lot of who I am today to be accepted.
I'm so enthralled with the story. First of all, because you're so interesting. And also because I think for our listeners to understand that other people have already created the path and the possibility of a pivot. I mean, this is a major pivot.
It's a pivot.
Every way you just described your identity at that moment is so different than your identity now. I mean, you being, I said the word, I think when I introduced how excited I was to talk to you, embodied. I feel like you're so embodied in this essence of you. Everything about you is lovely. It's feminine. It feels so obvious that your life is such a reflection of your alignment.
Thank you.
That to know that there was ever a version of you that was living into something that wasn't reflecting your true nature, but who you thought you had to be safe. I think a lot of people are blessed by knowing that that's available, right? That pivot can take place. And
and you have to, I talk a lot about creative courage in my life. And I feel like in order to really tap into it, you have to also know what it's not like to have that. And I haven't always lived a courageous life or a creative life. And that's okay. Both are equally powerful and one fuels the other.
Yeah. That's big. Yeah. I heard a friend of ours who has a lot of wisdom, who actually works in the realm of human design. And she said that typically people who come to really manifest something, it cooks for a while.
Incubates.
It incubates. And it doesn't usually really come online until like their 40s. And I thought, I feel that makes sense, right?
I feel like I'm not going to like peak until I'm like 50 or 60. You know?
It's like the marinating. Yeah. It's like, yes, there's something really big that's composting.
Being open to it, being in the, I always think that being a creative entrepreneur or doing what we do, it's living in discomfort and being okay with that and challenging yourself and evolving and, trying to measure today off of yesterday and like, that's it. And just doing the best you can.
Yeah. So, you're just sort of like following the river. Yeah. You're sort of surrendered at that point.
Yeah.
So you picked up a camera as a way of sort of being with the healing process. And then that camera led to what? Because there must have been 6 steps in between where you are now and picking up a camera. So what was the first thing that said to you, okay, Alyssa, this is going to become your new life. It's not just a healing tool. What was the first lily pad in that?
So I purchased my first camera. I was newly diagnosed with cancer. And I just started shooting around my condo in Chicago. That's where I was living at the time. And I fell in love with it. And I felt like it became more of a form of prayer and peace and something I had never experienced because I was just coming out of this. I was still like in the corporate coma and this chaos and healing from it. And so it was a friend of a friend's sister that called and was like, hey, I'm a new designer and I need a photo shoot. Can you do it? And I was like, yes. And so I intuitively took that leap of faith and styled the project and photographed it. And then having had that corporate background after I provided this gallery that's very overexposed now, but it's fine, I was like, how can I continue to be a resource and add value to this client? And so I actually pitched it to the first editorial magazine outlet and placed it. And so that was 10 years ago in an industry at that time that was pretty antiquated. It was all men. They were being hired by the magazines to go out to shoot for print. And I wasn't good enough at that time. So I solely focused on digital magazine outlets and really pioneered a new way of doing business then. And it's just snowballed.
What? Say more about that. You pioneered, say more, the digital aspect of what?
Of interiors and architectural photography. So I was one of the few women doing it at the time. And I wanted to add value and save my clients money from having to go through big PR firms that they couldn't afford at that time because everybody was kind of just starting out. And helping grow female small businesses was really important to me in a sustainable way. And then I also saw that the momentum we were gaining online was gaining them new clients. And so it's just a very synergistic.
So you were doing a little bit of PR by taking photos and then saying, I can now take this photo and get you some exposure by going to a digital
thousands of dollars, place you in digital magazine outlets, get the exposure that you're wanting to receive new clients, and then it continues to snowball. And so it's been 10 years later and a lot of collaborations later, and it's been a really beautiful progression.
I love that all sort of happened. You were building the engine while you were flying the plane, and it was something you just kept saying yes to. Yeah. And now tell us what your favorite things are that make up the work that you do now.
So in 2018, I really wanted to introduce more of an element of substance in an industry that only celebrated style. So I wrote my first book.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
I have it in my Florida home, so I wish I could show it to you right now. Go ahead.
But to me, that was the element that I needed to challenge. That was like my bucket list. It was a bucket list because I didn't think I was a good writer at the time. I didn't think I could do it. And I was like, okay, prove it to yourself. Do it. And so I'd visualize what it would look like on my coffee table. I'd visualize where I would be writing it. I would visualize getting the deal, and then it's a beautiful project. It's called The New Southern Style. And it's about humanizing our differences through the lens of creativity. And that's really important to me. And so I wrote the first inclusive design coffee table book for the industry, and it pubbed in 2020.
It's absolutely exquisite.
Thank you.
You wrote and took the photos that are in it.
Yeah.
So it's both beautiful to read, but beautiful to look at.
And there's something in there for everybody. There's like meditations. There's a lot of beautiful design aesthetics that can fit, your style. But ultimately, it's celebrating life pivots, creative courage, and our shared humanity. It's really important to me.
And, I was already sort of curious because I'm Jewish, you're Jewish. And when I find out that somebody was born or raised outside of New York City or Miami or Los Angeles, and they tell me something like Juneau, Alaska, or Oklahoma City, I say to myself right away, what is it like to grow up as a Jewish person in Oklahoma City? Because most people don't know.
In Tulsa.
Most people think that there's like 100 million Jews in the world, but there's actually 15 million Jews in the entire world. And in the United States, there's less than, maybe 6 million. And so that's divided all around the country. And so just for our listeners who are listening, because I'm Jewish and I kind of know a little bit about that, I know that the majority of people who have any kind of like interaction with Jewish people, it's because they live in Chicago or they live in New York City or they live in a place where there's a decent amount of Jews and a Jewish population. So Oklahoma City is a smaller.
So my parents met in Oklahoma City. We were raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
And how many Jews are there? 10,000?
I don't even know. I mean, but we have a really extraordinary small community in Tulsa. It was interesting. And it's actually one of the reasons that propelled me to write my book as a Jewish woman in the South, to be specific. Because there's, and we have a really beautiful Jewish community in Nashville, which is where I'm living right now. But it was hard, but it was valuable, if that makes sense. I always felt like I was like the only Jewish person in the room. Some of my earlier, these are hard stories, but some of my earlier memories were not lovely. Like my mother took me to the Jewish Community Center to swim one summer afternoon. And what started out as a warm summer, beautiful, light-filled day turned into me on a concrete bathroom floor with her body as a human shield because there was a sniper across the street threatening to shoot the women and children at the Jewish Community Center swimming pool for simply like living and breathing. And I was a child at that point. And to me, growing up with some of these experiences and stories, it just broke me open, you know, or like being in biology class when I was in middle school, and somebody lost their wallet and they stood up in the middle of the class and pointed at me and said, "The Jew took it." And I, you know, if there's one thing that my father instilled in me, he's like, you protect your family and your faith. And so I like stood up and fought back and then was sent to the headmaster's office, you know. But you can't be defined by those stories. They have to propel you to build something better and more just, you know?
Yeah. When I went to college, and first of all, I grew up in Florida, but when my parents moved to Florida, because we didn't have a lot of money, they moved all the way out to the Everglades to where there was like a brand new little housing development being built. And so I was the only Jewish kid in my elementary school classes, like kindergarten, first, second, third grade, like for a while until we moved to a different neighborhood.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of,
you feel like you're a stranger in your space.
And as a kid, you don't know any different. Like I remember being in first grade and people are saying things to me about me being Jewish and asking me weird questions like, do you have horns? And all these things that I'm in first grade not understanding, because to me, I didn't know the difference between being a kid who grew up in that house or being a kid who grew up in my house. And so, but when I got to college, I wanted to go to Boston University where Emma, my producer, went. But my parents got divorced and I couldn't afford it and I didn't have the grades to go. And I wound up going to school in Tallahassee at Florida State, which wound up being an awesome experience. I'm so happy I went there. But going to school in Tallahassee, I wasn't at that point really connected to my Judaism. And, got in my dorm freshman year, making friends, living my life. And I come home one night and on my door at my dorm is a big swastika. And I opened the door and I had taken like one little Cabbage Patch Kid from my like childhood bedroom and it was just like on my desk. And this little Cabbage Patch Kid that I had had since I was 5 had a noose around its neck and it was attached to the ceiling fan and there were numbers on its arm like a concentration camp victim and there was a swastika on its head, forehead, and then on the mirror in red paint it said "Die, filthy Jew." That's what it said. And I was so shocked and startled. I was like, first of all, who did this? Why does it matter to someone this much to do this to my room?
What an attack.
It was just crazy. Yeah. And I went to the RA and it turned out it was like these 2 boys that lived like down the hall, but like nothing actually happened to them. Yeah. There wasn't any kind of repercussion. But because of that instance was actually the event that made me want to know more about being Jewish because I knew nothing and was raised with very little. And so I sought out, there was a Hillel on campus and I wanted to know. And so it was really a gift to because if I would have gone to Boston University, chances are it would have been a little bit of a different thing. And I might not have been wanting to seek it out. And so I do think that growing up in a place where you might be other is both difficult, but also beautiful and powerful, like you said. So that was your sort of experience. And then it sounds like you wanted to write this book to show the beauty of the South and the diversity in it.
The energy. I wanted to break through stereotypes. And it was really important as a creative. There's no linear path. There's no universal blueprint. And it's all fueled by pivots and us listening to ourselves and really having that courage to be the architect of the life that we want to be creating for ourselves. And that's what I really wanted to showcase, that humanity, that palpable humanity on the page. Because at the end of the day, that's what tethers us, regardless.
And I love that, because to come full circle, even though I expressed that story I just shared, I loved living in the South. And I fell in love with Tallahassee, and I fell in love with canopied roads. And I realized that people are people wherever you go. And I've spent time in Charleston, and I've spent time in Nashville, and I just love being there.
Back to Nashville.
It's delightful. It's beautiful. And it's interesting because in the last, it's really been the last couple of years that I've gotten to, know you and sort of see how much of an advocate you've become for humanity in every way that you possibly can. And it's fascinating that this little girl who grew up in Oklahoma City, like Tulsa, who grew up in Tulsa, would have this assignment now that you never thought would be part of your life's mission.
Yeah.
Explain how you feel called right now to stand for goodness.
It's a big question. It's a really big question. It's been an evolution, an honest one, and an honest conversation I've had to have with myself. Being a creative, I'm very sensitive to the world around me. You know this. It's how we connect. And it started when the book came out, honestly, in 2020. That was really hard. And then now, October 7th, I knew intuitively what was going to come on October 8th. And we're not just in a cultural war. We're in a spiritual war. We're in an ideological war. And I mourned October 7th on that day. I was in shock, but there was some mechanism inside of me that went into full education mode to fight the propaganda online. And I don't know if it's been effective. However, I know that Jews historically are the barometer of a society's consciousness. And we are a people who have defied probability, and we're able to channel that into something creative and innovative and possibility here. We're like losing the propaganda war right now, and it's going to take the character and the courage of our citizens in this country to start standing up for what we value, which is our shared humanity, and coming back to center and finding things that bring us together and build bridges rather than divide us.
You said that so well, not just in words, but in spirit. Like, I felt how congruent, how loving, how solid that message is, not just in mind and reason, but in your heart. And I'm honored that you're sitting in my home, and I'm sitting here thinking, like, she in very ways could just go take on the world. Like, the way you speak and how effective your ideas are, because they make good sense. I have been feeling what you just said, but I haven't said that to that degree. But I do feel that there is a piece of our society that really does have an issue with America.
And think about it.
Yeah.
Israel is the only democratic state in the Middle East. And the privilege of some to be able to look at this conflict through the Western lens, you're failing immediately out of the gate.
Right. Yeah, it's It's very, very difficult, to say the least, when you've actually been there, which I have and you have, and I want to talk about that. And I spent 3 years there. And when you actually have been there and you have a depth of understanding a little bit more than someone who hasn't been there, it's very challenging, to say the least, to understand that. I'll say this. What can be said about you and I is that we truly go to sleep at night wishing that every person in the world is free. I think that what can be said that we know to be true is that you and I both want every Jew, every Muslim, every Christian, every Buddhist, every Hindu, every Sikh, every woman, every man, every child, every creature, every being to feel free and seen and aligned
and safe. Let's talk about safety.
I want that for every person, right? So I personally don't know a single Jewish person that wants anything other than peace for the entire region. One thing that's interesting that most people don't know is that the reason why there are so few Jewish people is because Jews don't convert other people to be Jewish. And I want to say something about that. Why is that important? Because we believe that everyone is already who they're supposed to be and connected intrinsically to the divine.
Correct.
So to step back and understand that there is that truth, that we don't convert. In fact, if someone wants to convert to Judaism, they have to try to come 3 different times. They get turned away. The reason I'm saying that is because that ideologically is very different than wanting the whole world to think and believe the way.
This is a cultural war.
Right.
I was recently in Israel.
I want to hear whatever you want to share. Also, you had never been there. It's not just like you went and had this giant experience. You were having the first experience you'd ever had there. So I'm sure so many things were opened up inside.
Before going to Israel, everybody was like, as soon as you touch down, you're going to feel like you're at home. And I landed and I didn't.
I was just exhausted and the guy in front of me is talking loudly.
Well, I went to really bear witness and to share through my lens, like the truth, and to also amplify hostage family members' voices. And so I got off the plane and I went to really, I felt like I was entering a war zone to make sense of the war at home in the West, right? And I landed, I got off the plane, I was on a schedule. I immediately went into the hostage forum, Bring Them Home Now. They're doing extraordinary work. I spoke with 2 sisters whose 3rd sister is still in captivity at the hands of Hamas. The strength.
There's no words.
From them, and the light and the beauty and the resilience was profound.
I think it's really, really triggering. And I also think it's really important. You know, when I was a kid, there were things that were really hard to watch, and I'm glad I watched them. And I think it's important because people they'll hear, you know, October 7th, but they don't really know the depth. And I understand that there's a way in which we want to protect the dignity and humanity of the victims. And so some of that footage is not appropriate and at the same time
necessary.
There is a level of education that you only get once you know and see what actually is the reality. And when you say there's two sisters who have a sister, it was literally
24 years old.
She's 24 years old.
Yeah. She has her whole life in front of her.
I mean, it's like daggers, like the words feel painful, but you went and actually were there with these people.
I needed to be there. And there's not a more important time in history to do that right now.
So what was your trip? What were the things that you saw and the things that really moved you that you did?
High level view. I went with an extraordinary group, and what I took away, and I'll say this, I didn't necessarily feel like I was home when I landed, but as soon as I came back and I stepped foot in JFK, I knew that I had just left my home. And I was with such extraordinary, brave, humble, quiet heroes who are societal entrepreneurs, heads of VC funds, soldiers, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-old soldiers who are full human beings who have such responsibility, meaning, and purpose, and don't look at it as an obligation, but they look at it as a privilege, and they are the ones protecting that state. Family members of the hostages still being held, and their courage, their strength, their resilience, their fortitude to continue every day to get out of bed and share their child's story, their sister's story, their brother's story. Understanding that Israel is ground zero for what's to come for the rest of the world. If we do not
That cannot be said enough.
There is such a wellspring, a reservoir of solidarity in this country. And I left feeling hopeful, feeling at peace, and having such a deep sense of faith that we will prevail because goodness prevails, and we have to. And I've been reading a lot about healing fractured societies. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs is amazing. And he talks a lot about personal responsibility. And that's something in this country that we do not have in the United States. We don't have personal responsibility, and we don't have responsibility for one another. And that is the vast difference of what occurs in Israel. They have responsibility for themselves, and they have responsibility for their family, their friends, their communities, deeply rooted in that culture. And we could take a page out of their book.
There's just so much beauty in that. And in the last few months, I've been blessed to have a few evenings here where some of the hostage families have come in. And what really strikes me, in addition to the horror, which is it's so startling, what's also so striking is that every single one of those hostage families, when they're asked, do you have any hate in your heart and anger, they say, no. I just want peace. I want peace for those people.
This is apolitical. This is a humanitarian issue.
Can you imagine somebody's family member is kidnapped and tortured? Or can you imagine someone's seen their grandmother burned alive on Facebook? They're watching it being live streamed. Or can you imagine, and the person says, I want peace. That alone is a miracle. It's a miracle that a human being could want that. But the fact that that is true, the fact that that exists, when you see these, there was a large gathering for Israel. There were 300,000 Jews in DC singing Matisyahu's One Day. There'll be no more war. That's what we're singing. I think that that's really, really telling. But all of that gets drowned out when there is such a strong propaganda narrative of what's really true and what isn't. It's like, I lived in Israel and I spent time and enjoyed time with Jews and Christians and Arabs and got to know the land, and even volunteered in Gaza and watched as when all the Jews pulled out of Gaza in 2005, I was there as part of that project. And we then watched bulldozers bulldoze greenhouses and hospitals and homes that could have been utilized, and instead took all this money and built terror tunnels instead of building what could have been Singapore. I mean, it could have been the most beautiful.
I want to be really clear about this. I'm pro-Palestinian. I'm very anti-Hamas. I am anti-extremism.
Well, that's what we're both saying.
Yeah.
That's what it means to say we want every person to have freedom and life and love. Like, to say, even, first of all, it goes without saying that you would have to say you're pro-Palestinian because you're pro-human.
I'm pro-human.
Okay. You want everyone to be free.
This is a really important, critical piece, because we're not going to win this propaganda war. We will win the human war, and we have to start standing up.
I think that's a really beautiful way to say it. So, to that point, I mean, what you said before, I mean, we're both, I'm pro every human life and anti-terror groups. My family that live in Israel, so there's 2 girls and 2 boys in the family, and they're all of marriage age at this point, young married in their 20s, 30s, cousins of mine. And the oldest girl, she's a doctor. She's actually a pediatric surgeon, and her husband has been, fighting in Gaza. And this family, these are the kids that were part of groups for peace. These are the kids that used to be involved at these like summer camps where they would bring together, Jews and Arabs and Muslims. Like the level of advocacy that was happening in the actual places where people were massacred on October 7th, what people don't realize is like these were the people who wanted peace and coexistence more than any people in the world. The thing that needs to be said is that if you really want freedom and peace, then we should all be on the side of ending terrorism and coming up with the solutions for how do we de-radicalize? How do we create love?
We stop platforming extremism.
Right.
We stop platforming it. We stop it. We have to. We stop feeding into it and we stop platforming it.
It might be very difficult for people to hear this conversations or conversations like this, and yet it's all of our problem now.
Yeah. This isn't just
it's all of our problem.
This isn't just a Jewish Israeli problem. This is every citizen in this country who wants safety and who wants to be able to live in an environment that supports their goals, the visions they have for their family.
So what is it like for you now? I mean, you come back from this very powerful experience. How do you live your life? How do you go back to taking pictures and talking about like housewares when you're really feeling so called to something so important?
Full transparency. I wasn't expecting reintegration to be a little bit more challenging. I didn't even think about it. And it's been hard. And I'm still like working through that because my heart is still there. I'm thinking I'm going to be going back in soon.
When are you going to go?
In April. And I left with more healing than I anticipated and so much hope. And I think we need to be the humble, quiet heroes every day in reinstating certain values that we want to see tomorrow and being of service. I think that's the biggest thing to one another.
It's so beautiful and it's so touching, and I'm not surprised though that you left there with hope because Hatikva means hope, and that is what I got from my grandparents. Like no matter what they went through and how many pogroms and how many October 7ths and how many things that they'd gone through,
intifadas and all of it.
I mean, it's like that Anne Frank quote, like I still believe in spite of everything that people are really good at heart. Like we as a people believe that. We see the glass as half full.
The thing that was the most inspiring is really culture. They live every day on the extremes, right? To say the least. But crisis for them breeds creativity. Yeah. Crisis for them breeds innovation. Crisis for them breeds solidarity. And again, back to our privilege of safety in this country. We need to take a page out of their book.
Yeah, and it's interesting because every now and then the world reminds you of your assignment. And I feel like Abraham, who was the first Jew, he brought such radical consciousness to this planet. I mean, he was the first human being that said that God wasn't an idol or something you could touch, but rather God is one. We're all part of that one collective, right? That oneness, that God is something that we can all be connected to, that divine, that oneness. And I think that truly, like, our job is to be the light and to remind people of the light that's within them. And so sometimes it takes things like this that, bring out the best. It's almost like, if you look at history, it's almost like the Jewish people, under the worst circumstances,
prevailed.
It's like
defied
it, like that's like what cracks open like even more innovation and more light. It's like that's what maybe people who persecute us don't know. It's like, oh, you're just going to activate that thing, that superpower, where we now get more hopeful. We now go even further to try to advance the world.
I feel really tethered to my convictions with it. And I think prior, maybe I was navigating my relationship with fear, with being too public about it, because it was hard. I was writing my second book when all this happened, and that opportunity slipped away for reasons I don't know after my content drastically shifted. And I now no longer have that fear, and I want my future children to be growing up in a better world. And I think you have to break through your own limitations to do what's best for the greater good.
I mean, that is like an entire podcast episode that we could have on that, but I'm so glad that you mentioned it, because I think we're all here to play the hand that we were dealt and not play someone else's hand.
True.
And most of the time, people will choose belonging over being authentic. And what's really sad about that is you're not then free, because you're living someone else's opinion of how you should live your life. But also, even if what you say triggers someone, how do you not know that that is a good thing? Because the things that trigger us are also good, because they force us to know where we stand in relation to what triggers us. And so to not speak your truth is such a disservice to yourself and also to the world. And I think that
there's been a synergy with it that I never anticipated. And I feel like even when I was in Israel, I was in Jerusalem at a presidential press release. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, why am I here? And I ran into a mutual friend, and it puts you on your path. It puts you on an aligned path when you're following your authenticity, and the world feels a little smaller, a little friendlier, and a little bit more powerful, and you continue to pursue your truth.
Yeah. And there's 8 billion people in the world. You don't have to be for everyone.
Yeah.
But the more you stand for who you are, you'll meet the people who you're supposed to stand with on this journey, right? And so I'm so impressed and proud of you. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it, but to live a life where you're actively willing to deal with hate and deal with horrible comments and feedback online. It's not easy. We're all still the same girls we were in 5th grade, and it doesn't feel good to be given death threats or to have people hate you. Or I've had a bunch of that happen since October. And I just keep going back to what you said, which is like, I think ultimately goodness always wins. And I love people regardless of whether they're Muslim or Christian or Jewish. I just love people. I love that we all come from the same. I mean, if we close our eyes, we see so much further than we see with our eyes open.
100%. And social media on this macro level isn't your local community, right?
No.
So when they were calling for like the global intifada, do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Global intifada. You know what I did the night before? I went grocery shopping with beautiful Muslim women. We were all very kind and lovely to one another. And I'm just like, you got to start at the local level. You just do.
Yeah, I can start at the local level. Thank you for being so generous and vulnerable and courageous to have this whole conversation. I feel like it's only just begun, and I don't know what's in store for you, but I know that because you have so much integrity and you're so gorgeous inside and out, that I just feel like God will have an unbelievable path for you. I think your role in the world is really important. And I'm so proud to know you, and you inspire me so much. And thank you for giving me the courage, because I've been afraid to have these conversations, and really, that's so sad, because you and I are saying things that people really need to hear, which is that we all need to come together in support of collective freedom.
Well, I just appreciate this conversation. And with you, I honor your heart and I honor your light. And your heart is always open. And that's the biggest force that protects you, because it keeps providing. And I'm really grateful for you.
Thank you. I know that, like, in Judaism, our day, like Shabbat, starts Friday night and ends Saturday night, because the day begins at night. And I say that because my rabbi always says that darkness is the beginning of the story, not the end. Mm. And so when it looks like it's dark, just wait, because the light's going to come. And with all of the intensity that's going on, in every time of pain, what's also revealed is the people who want to bring more light. And so you are one of those special, rare souls, and you're doing that. And it matters. So thank you. And thank you for coming here.
Thank you. I think we just cried all the way through.